Welcome to the Invite Health podcast, where our degreed healthcare professionals are excited to offer you the most important health and wellness information you need to make informed choices about your health. You can learn more about the products discussed in each of these episodes and all that Invite Health has to offer at www.invitehealth.com/podcast. First-time customers can use promo code podcast at checkout for an additional 15% off your first purchase. Let's get started.
There's a natural compound that's found in our joints, and that is glucosamine. And most people have heard that glucosamine can be very, very beneficial when it comes to targeting inflammation within the joints. And for those who experience joint discomfort and they start to utilize glucosamine, they oftentimes find really positive effects from this. And we know a lot more about glucosamine than we did previously when it comes to what exactly glucosamine is doing in the human body. And I want to talk about that today in some detail. So I'm Amanda Williams, MD, MPH, and when it comes to glucosamine, we know that its primary utilization is for the health of our joints. And when we think about the way that it helps to maintain connective tissue between the bones to maintain that joint functionality. But we also know that glucosamine is doing something really amazing besides that of that cushioning support of the joint and for that facilitation of good healthy movement in the joint. We now realize that glucosamine has multiple functions in the human body. And there was a study that was published in 2010 in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition, and they found through research at University of Washington School of Public Health in conjunction with the Fred Hutchinson Cancer Research Center that those who supplemented with glucosamine on a regular basis had a significant reduction in all-cause mortality. So they started to think about this and they're, well, how in the world is it that glucosamine can be helping besides just the joints? So the researchers really dove into this. And what they found was that glucosamine, along with chondroitin, both target NF-kappa beta. And NF-kappa beta is one of the master regulators for inflammation in the body. So if we have excess NF-kappa beta, we're going to have higher levels of inflammation, which is never a good thing because we know that inflammation is directly causative to all of the different chronic disease states out there. So chronic inflammation is not a good thing. And NF-kappa beta, this particular pathway, when that is activated, we see this massive amount of inflammation that occurs systemic wide. So they said, well, let's look into this in a little bit more detail. So the National Health and Nutrition Examination Survey started to populate data from over 16,000 participants that they tracked over the course of 10 years. And they were looking at their use of supplementation when it came to glucosamine. And once again, what they were able to find, and they published this in the Journal of the American Board of Family Medicine, was a 58% lowered adjusted risk of dying from cardiovascular disease in the people who took glucosamine. Is that not an absolutely huge number? 58% lowered risk of dying from cardiovascular disease in those who took glucosamine. So we go back to that whole point about inflammation. Now, the researchers said, well, this is really interesting. Let's see if it's impacting anything else in the body. We know glucosamine already exists. We know that glucosamine is this natural compound that we've always just associated with our joints. We now recognize that those who supplement with glucosamine had this cardioprotective effect from it. So researchers over in the UK, they started to look at glucosamine supplementation and looking at links for diabetes. And this is what they found, and they published this in the Diabetes Care Journal. They assessed the data from over 400,000 men and women. And through their data population, they were looking at different markers. They were looking at C-reactive protein levels for inflammation, but they were also looking at different markers that were indicative for diabetes. So they were looking at hemoglobin A1C, fasting insulin levels, fasting glucose. And once again, they were able to see this correlation between those who supplemented with glucosamine and having a lowered risk of type 2 diabetes. And they said this was the first study of its kind to investigate that association between glucosamine supplementation and type 2 diabetes. So they were looking at the cardiovascular markers, they were looking at the markers for metabolism when it comes to diabetes, and they were able to draw upon this conclusion. So this is why I wanted to talk about the glucosamine study today, because we recognize now that when we are thinking about glucosamine, far beyond that of just for our joints. And we know that, glucosamine's been shown to be just as beneficial as NSAIDs, glucosamine and chondroitin both, when it comes to targeting discomfort within the joint. And we know that when it comes to glucosamine utilization, that we see this ability to fend off not only that inflammation within the joints, but now we're seeing the ability to fend off inflammation throughout the entire body, which makes this a highly functional nutrient for you to include into your routine. And I think that for many folks, when you think about a particular nutrient, sometimes we get tunnel vision. We think, okay, glucosamine and chondroitin just for our joints. But now that we can see, wow, this is making a huge difference because we know that it is now targeting inflammation. Let me tell you about some more of the findings out of that 400,000 people that they looked at. Not only did they find that decrease in type 2 diabetes, they found a 27% lowered risk in death from respiratory disease. They found a 26% decrease risk in digestive disease. They found that significant downward shift in that cardiovascular disease. So seeing all these different ways in which glucosamine can potentiate these positive outcomes for us, for our health, certainly makes it one of those go-to supplements that has this multimodal impact for us. And we have seen for years and years and years the research when it comes to arthritis. And so we certainly can be utilizing it for that, but I just want you to be aware of the other benefits that glucosamine can be providing you when it comes to your lungs, to your heart, when it comes to your GI tract, as well as when it comes to just overall cellular functioning. So that is all that I have for you for today. I want to thank you so much for tuning in to the Invite Health podcast. You can find all of our episodes for free wherever you listen to podcasts or by visiting invitehealth.com/podcast. Do make sure that you subscribe and you leave us a review. You can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, and we will see you next time for another episode of the Invite Health podcast.